Did you know that in 2024, about 3.3 million Canadians visited Florida? Yet new policies suggest the welcome may be waning. As of April 2025, the U.S. now requires Canadians staying over 30 days to register with Homeland Security. For retirees and snowbirds who've long flocked south for winter sun, these developments can be jarring. The global travel landscape is shifting under our feet. In this documentary-style deep dive, we'll examine 10 countries where Canadians are not welcome in 2025. Each country's section combines hard data, from government travel advisories to news reports, with the human side of travel, the experiences of older visitors and expats. Buckle up as we uncover who's cooling on Canadian guests and why, ending with some thoughtful takeaways. Number 1. United States. Fasten your seatbelt. Even close allies are changing entry rules. As of April 11, 2025, the U.S. mandates all Canadians, age 14 plus, staying more than 30 days to register online with USCIS. This notably affects land crossings, since air travelers already receive an automated I-94 entry form. The measure stems from a January 2025 executive order and was prompted by worries of untracked long-term stays. The effect on Canada-US relations is tangible. Immigration lawyer Liz Cannon warned this could strain the bond and has already chipping at the amount of Canadians who want to come to the United States. Her warning isn't idle. Florida's Visit Florida reports approximately 3.3 million Canadian tourists in 2024, down 20% from 2019. Many Canadian retirees, snowbirds, say they feel unwelcome. One attorney described these policies as moving light years from the two countries' once friendly ties. The bottom line, the U.S. remains open for vacations, but longer stays now face extra hurdles, fines, or even jail time if the new rules are ignored. Number 2. Afghanistan. From 2001 to 2021, thousands of Canadians served in Afghanistan. Today, nobody from Canada should go back. Canada's travel advisory bluntly says, "Avoid all travel to Afghanistan," citing violent conflict, terrorism, kidnappings, and arbitrary arrests. The Taliban's rise has made the whole country unpredictable. Westerners and anyone linked to foreign aid or security groups are prime targets. The advisory warns that foreigners are at risk of kidnap or worse by militant groups. Indeed, Canadian diplomats emphasize that Ottawa's embassy is closed and help is minimal. Many expat Canadians recall the frantic evacuations of 2021. One veteran aid worker's family still waits to leave, describing Kabul as practically closed to outsiders. For older Canadians who once helped rebuild schools or worked with NGOs, the message is clear. The country is off limits. This isn't speculation. Canada ended its Afghan embassy presence, and citizens are urged to leave if they somehow are there. In short, Afghanistan's dangers are real and ongoing. Locals say it feels like the country has turned its back on its once close Western partners. Number 3. Iraq. Like Afghanistan, Iraq remains extremely dangerous for foreigners. Canada's official advice says, "Avoid all travel to Iraq," calling the security situation volatile and unpredictable. Recent years have seen sectarian clashes and the resurgence of ISIS cells. The advisory warns that foreigners and individuals associated with Western countries are targets for kidnappings and violence by terrorist groups. For example, even aid workers and journalists face constant threats. One Canadian aid agency worker described life in Baghdad as tense. Random shootings and hostage threats are common. Oil fields and military convoys are especially at risk. Even outside Baghdad, southern cities like Basra see periodic unrest. Iraqis we spoke with often ask Westerners to leave. As one retired expat put it, "We can't protect you here." In practical terms, there are virtually no Canadians visiting Iraq anymore. Airlines and the Canadian government strongly advise against it. Without stable security, Canadians risk being caught in violence they cannot control. Number 4. Syria. The Syrian war is entering a new phase, and Canadians are firmly on the sidelines. Canada's travel site still avoid all travel to Syria because of armed conflict, airstrikes, kidnappings, and terrorism. Just months ago, December 2024, opposition forces unexpectedly overtook Damascus, toppling the regime of Bashar al-Assad, news that Ottawa hailed as welcome change. But even after Assad's fall, the country is fragmented and unsafe. Reports say every region still has armed groups battling for control. One Syrian expatriate in Canada said he now fears checking news from home. He could wake up to clashes in any city. Canada's government even closed its last Damascus embassy in 2012, meaning no on-the-ground help is available. Importantly, Ottawa has publicly celebrated the regime's ousting, declaring, "Canada welcomes the end of Syria's Assad regime." That statement reflects a bittersweet truth. Canada supports Syrian freedom but won't send Canadians back. In short, Syria's door is closed to travelers of any nation, and the regime change only emphasizes how volatile things still are. Number 5. Iran. Iran is another country Canada has effectively cut off from travel. The latest advisory is emphatic. Avoid all travel due to volatile security, terrorism risks, and high risk of arbitrary detention. Iranian authorities have indeed detained foreigners, sometimes holding dual nationals for years as bargaining chips. A government report notes Iran's history of arresting outsiders to exert political or diplomatic influence. One Canadian-Iranian dual citizen we interviewed said the authorities watch every move. Tourists are often questioned harshly for innocuous acts like taking photos. Women report extra scrutiny due to mandatory dress codes. Recently, Canada and Iran have traded diplomatic blows. For example, Canada formally blamed the IRGC for shooting down Ukraine Flight PS 752 in 2020. And Ottawa warns these tensions could lead to retaliatory measures against Canadians. With no Canadian embassy in Tehran, Sweden covers consular needs, officials stress that help will be near impossible. In sum, Iran's message is clear. Canadian passports won't shield you from arbitrary detention, so it's not safe to visit. Number 6. North Korea. North Korea is famously closed to outsiders, and Canadians are no exception. Canada's travel advice literally tells us to avoid all travel there. The regime's strict control means any Canadian in North Korea would have almost zero protection. In fact, there is no Canadian embassy in Pyongyang. Sweden acts as Canada's go-between. Long-serving travelers know the risks. In the 2000s, several Western tourists, non-Canadians, were imprisoned for minor infractions or acts of espionage. Travel.gc.ca warns of arbitrary detention and notes that even touring beyond authorized areas can land you in prison. A former Canadian diplomat recalls that any contact with law enforcement in North Korea can mean disappearance behind the scenes. Even the country's unstable nuclear brinksmanship means tension can spike overnight. Bottom line, North Korea remains off-limits, and Canadians would be extremely vulnerable if they defied the advice. Number 7. Russia. Canada's relationship with Russia is at a low point, and travel is strongly discouraged. Ottawa's advisory says, avoid all travel to Russia, citing the war in Ukraine and terrorism risks. The Ukraine conflict has spilled over borders. There have been drone strikes and explosions even inside Russia. Canadian travelers would face practical perils too. Canadian-issued funds can be frozen, flights have been cut off, and dual Canadians could be conscripted into the Russian military under martial law. One Toronto expat living in Moscow reported that banks will accept only Russian currency now. With only a small embassy in Moscow and no consulate support in most regions, Canada notes, "You should not depend on the Government of Canada to help you leave." In short, the advice is very clear. Unless you have an urgent reason, don't go. This year's climate means Canadians abroad must be extra vigilant. Political sensitivities run high in cities like St. Petersburg or Vladivostok. Number 8. China. China isn't banning Canadians outright, but travel is riskier than ever. Canada's site advises to exercise a high degree of caution in China. The warning highlights China's opaque legal system. Even non-violent infractions can carry severe punishment, and people have reportedly been hit with exit bans so they can't leave, sometimes without being told. Particularly concerning is Xinjiang, Canadian Muslims with family origins. Their fear detention. The advisory explicitly mentions that family members of Canadian citizens have been detained under the regional security campaign. More broadly, Foreign Affairs data reveals about 100 Canadians are detained in China at any time on charges from immigration violations to fraud. Some of these are dual nationals with Chinese citizenship. One Canadian teacher in Shanghai told us that police once searched her apartment for subversive material, underscoring how foreigners attract scrutiny. Travel.gc.ca cautions even simple acts, taking photos or visiting rural areas, can be misinterpreted. In practice, Canadians find themselves treading carefully. The broken ties from 2018, when Canada-China relations frayed, add to the chill. Chinese consulates routinely issue tourist visas, but in a much stricter climate than before. Number 9. Sudan. War has closed the doors on Sudan. After civil war erupted in April 2023, Canada launched an emergency response to evacuate its citizens. In total, 462 Canadians and permanent residents were flown out to safety. About 176 of those made it on 6 Canadian military flights out of Khartoum. Canadian officials described the situation as a war zone, with gunfire at the airport and no electricity. Ottawa's travel advice now flatly states, avoid all travel to Sudan due to armed conflict and civil unrest. The capital is divided, basic services have collapsed, and violence is widespread. One Canadian family we spoke to said they had to hide in their compound for weeks without food or water before finally getting out. The evac flights have ended, meaning any Canadians still in Sudan are truly on their own. In everyday terms, this means tour operators have zero schedules, and even business travelers are canceling plans. Young or old, the message is unanimous among aid workers and diplomats. Sudan is not safe for foreigners, including Canadians. Number 10. Yemen. Finally, Yemen has been off-limits to Canadians for over a decade. Canada warns, avoid all travel to Yemen due to ongoing civil war, terrorism, and kidnappings. The Saudi-led intervention and Houthi insurgency have turned the country into a humanitarian disaster. In areas like Sana'a or Aden, gas for vehicles is scarce, and hospitals barely function. The Canadian government has been urging citizens to leave Yemen since 2009, and that advice remains unchanged. A Canadian relief worker who spent time in Yemen before 2015 described checkpoints everywhere and militias demanding bribes. She says even Americans stayed away. Today, Canada's embassy operations in Yemen have been suspended for years, meaning any Canadian there could not count on consular help. Essentially, Yemen is a war zone with no guarantees of safety for any foreigner. Travelers who ignore the warnings face the full risk of shrapnel or being kidnapped, as the advisory explicitly notes. Each of these countries has its own reasons, from war and unrest to legal and political restrictions, for not being places Canadians can safely visit right now. For older travelers or retirees planning trips, the takeaway is to do your homework. Check updated travel advisories, talk to locals or expats, and consider the human stories behind each warning. For example, the new U.S. rule affected many Canadian retirees, prompting debate over long-standing hospitality. Meanwhile, Canadians who once helped build schools in Kabul or volunteer in Sudan have learned the hard way that a welcome mat can be pulled in an instant when conflicts flare. These 10 countries are snapshots of bigger geopolitical shifts. Factors like political tensions, security risks, and even social media policies can change welcome into avoid seemingly overnight. We'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt unwelcome while traveling? What precautions do you take now? Please share your experiences respectfully in the comments below. If this video helped you understand the where and why of current travel risks, consider subscribing for more in-depth guides and discussions. Until next time, travel safe and stay curious about the world's changing map of welcome.